Hi, everyone. This is Global Podcast, your window to the world. Breaking news, big ideas, your global hangout for what's happening now, and bold conversations. Wherever you are, we're bringing it to you. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're looking today at the aftermath of that horrific terror attack in Pahalgam on April 22nd, 2025. A truly awful event. 26 civilians killed, including tourists. The world reacted with horror, obviously. But what we're focusing on today is something else. The sheer level of international condemnation Pakistan faced afterwards. And from some really unexpected places, it led to quite a moment of diplomatic isolation for them.
It really did. We've been digging into the news reports, the diplomatic statements, all the communication that flowed right after the attack. And what emerges is, well, it's a fascinating picture of unprecedented international criticism aimed squarely at Pakistan. It's this reaction, particularly from groups and countries maybe not usually critical, that's so striking. So our mission today is to try and understand why this response was so different this time. What does it tell us about the region's dynamics?
Okay, let's dive into that then. This unusual condemnation. It wasn't just, say, India or countries typically critical of Pakistan speaking out, was it? The sources suggest something much wider.
Absolutely not. It went way beyond the usual geopolitical lines. We saw really strong statements from nations, even organizations, that historically might have been supportive, or at least, neutral towards Islamabad. This kind of unified, broad censure really underscores how seriously the world took this particular attack.
Yeah, and for me, one of maybe the most significant point from the sources was the Taliban. The government in Afghanistan, their condemnation was remarkably strong.
It was, wasn't it? For the first time, really, their foreign minister, the face of their diplomacy, and a government spokesperson, they publicly denounced the attack.
Yeah.
And in very stark terms, words like dastardly, unacceptable. They offered condolences too, which is just fascinating when you consider the history. I mean, Pakistan's military, their intelligence agencies, they were key backers of Mujahideen groups back in the day. And that relationship evolved into close ties with the Taliban. Pakistan often saw Afghanistan as providing what they term strategic depth.
Right.
Strategic depth. That's the idea that a friendly Afghanistan gives them breathing room, a buffer against India on their eastern border.
Precisely. It's been a cornerstone of Pakistan's security thinking for a long time. Afghanistan's stability, or at least its alignment, was seen as critical. So for this Taliban government to condemn so publicly an attack that many suspect Pakistan had a hand in, well, it speaks volumes about how strained that relationship has become.
It really does. And it looks like India saw an opening there. The sources talk about direct diplomatic talks between India and the Taliban in Kabul. That itself feels like a big step.
Oh, a very significant step. You had an Indian delegation led by a joint secretary from the Ministry of External Affairs, so a senior figure, showing how important India viewed this, meeting directly with Taliban officials. And the reports say they discussed regional security, and specifically the Pahalgam attack was on the table.
This kind of direct contact, it suggests, well, maybe a warming of ties between Delhi and Kabul. And if you connect the dots, it just further isolates Pakistan, doesn't it? Especially since Pakistan's own relationship with the Taliban has soured recently.
Right, over issues like the crackdown on Afghan refugees and Kabul accusing Pakistan of sheltering anti-Taliban groups.
Exactly. All those tensions were already simmering.
So that whole strategic depth concept is looking pretty shaky right now.
It really is. It seems to be eroding quite rapidly.
Okay, so beyond the Taliban, what about some of Pakistan's more, let's say, traditional allies or partners? Did we see shifts there too?
Yes, definitely some noteworthy reactions there as well. Take Nepal, for instance. They expressed really deep sorrow and solidarity with India. And that was particularly felt because, tragically, a Nepali citizen was among the victims in Pahalgam.
Ah, right. That makes their statement even more poignant.
It does. And then you have Saudi Arabia. They also issued a strong condemnation, sent condolences directly to India, which is quite significant because historically, Saudi Arabia has often been seen as, well, either neutral or perhaps leaning a bit more towards Pakistan in regional issues. So this is a clear statement.
Interesting. And Turkey, another country with close historical ties to Pakistan, their response seemed a bit more nuanced.
That's a good way to put it. Nuanced, yes. On one hand, Turkey did call for restraint, de-escalation between India and Pakistan after the attack. Standard diplomatic language, perhaps, but on the other hand, there were credible reports circulating, and our sources picked up on this, that Turkey actually denied or delayed some previously agreed arms shipments to Pakistan right when tensions were peaking.
Really? Okay, that does suggest a more cautious stance.
Exactly. It points towards a reluctance, perhaps, to be seen as overtly backing Islamabad in this specific climate. A sort of careful distancing, maybe.
So putting all these pieces together, the Taliban, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, what's the underlying dynamic here? Why this major shift, this strong condemnation from so many quarters?
Well, I think what the Pahalgam attack really did, quite starkly, was expose the contradictions in Pakistan's longstanding narrative about terrorism. For years, Pakistan has faced accusations of, cultivating and using groups like the Taliban as proxies, especially concerning Kashmir, while simultaneously positioning itself internationally as a major victim of terrorism.
Right, that dual narrative.
Exactly. And the Pahalgam attack, plus this wave of international reaction, especially from unexpected players like the Taliban, it just made that narrative much harder to sustain. It seems to have significantly damaged Pakistan's diplomatic credibility on this front. It's tougher now for them to portray themselves purely as victims when the evidence, or at least the strong suspicion, points towards state links to the perpetrators.
And the Taliban's stance, as you said, directly hits that strategic depth idea. It weakens Pakistan's influence in Afghanistan quite visibly. It's like a key strategic asset suddenly became, well, not an asset.
Precisely. That's a key outcome here. This attack feels like a catalyst. It seems to have solidified a growing global consensus, or at least a stronger convergence of views, about Pakistan's alleged role in sponsoring or enabling certain militant groups. Countries that might have held back before, perhaps for geopolitical reasons, seem more willing now to condemn these actions publicly and align more openly with India's position on cross-border terrorism. And this growing consensus, this alignment, it inevitably leaves Pakistan more isolated. The international pressure on them to genuinely crack down on militant groups operating from their soil, it just intensifies.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the main players and their positions based on what the sources showed us. We had the Taliban condemning the attack, engaging with India pushing diplomacy, sticking firm on anti-terror stance, Nepal showing strong solidarity with India, especially given the loss of their citizen, Saudi Arabia with a notable strong condemnation, Turkey calling for restraint, but also, reportedly, pulling back on arms sales, showing caution, and Pakistan denying involvement, of course, but facing this really significant diplomatic isolation and growing international pressure.
That sums up the key reactions in the resulting picture quite well. A very accurate snapshot.
So the big picture takeaway here seems pretty clear. The Pahalgam attack wasn't just a tragedy. It triggered a significant, maybe even dramatic diplomatic realignment in South Asia. Pakistan is finding itself unusually isolated, internationally speaking, and its regional clout, especially concerning Afghanistan, looks considerably weakened.
That's absolutely the core conclusion emerging from this deep dive into the sources. It marks a potentially pivotal moment. And that leads us to the final thought, something for you, our listeners, to ponder. What are the long-term consequences of this diplomatic shift likely to be for stability in South Asia? How might this affect Pakistan's strategic thinking, its future willingness or ability to use proxy groups? And perhaps most importantly, what does this apparent hardening of international consensus mean for the future of counterterrorism efforts and the balance of power in this absolutely critical part of the world? Something to keep thinking about.